What time is it? Game time!
It's gonna be special. They're gonna talk about this forever.
Welcome to American Football Stories.
Puts his head down, crashes and spins, and dives. Touchdown!
Bringing together the many perspectives that make up college football in the NFL.
Football is one of the greatest sports ever invented.
From players and coaches.
Believe, baby, believe, baby.
Hey, we playing to win right here, fellas.
To the front office and scouts.
The public is finally beginning to catch up, but they don't even know half the truth.
Us against the world, let's get it.
Your hosts, Robert Parker and Nick Knudsen, bring you American Football Stories.
All right, welcome to the American Football Story podcast. My name is Nick Knudsen, and we are joined by our guest, Jay Drew of the Deseret News today. Mr. Drew covers BYU sports. You can follow him on Twitter at DrewJ. And Jay, I'll kick it over to you. You have anything else you'd like to promote? I understand you're about to become a grandfather. Congratulations on that.
Yeah, kind of a long time coming. I got 3 kids and they're married, and my oldest one is, 27. So we've been waiting a little bit for this day, but any day now. So we're excited. It's going to be a little boy, and good times out here in Utah.
That's great. That's great. Congratulations. That's always fun. That'll be fun and exhausting at the same time. Be a good time.
Yeah, fortunately, my daughter and her husband live up in a town called Bountiful, which is just north of Salt Lake, and I live down here at the south end of Salt Lake County in a town called Draper. So just far enough where we don't have to be called on to be babysitters every day, but obviously close enough to see them once a week or so.
You get to show up for the fun stuff. That's great.
Absolutely.
That's great. Now, Draper, Utah, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that the hometown of one Zach Wilson?
It is. Yep. Zach went to Corner Canyon High School in Draper. It's kind of a new school. It's been open about 10 years. But it's the kind of the south end of the Salt Lake Valley. You go over what we call the point of the mountain into Utah County, and that's where Provo is and BYU is, obviously. So, yeah, we're from the same town, I guess.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Robert and I, we're Florida Gator guys, but we do follow the national scene closely, especially with the start of this podcast here. So we might need some tips and pointers on BYU. But I was originally inspired to dive into this topic. I saw a tweet from Alex Kirshner of the Moon Crew and the Split Duo podcast. He said, I think we should seriously consider that BYU might be the 4th best team and prepare to put them in the playoff if they don't lose any games this year. So we're going to dive into that topic. That's going to be our overall premise, but we're going to first set it up for folks at home, because I think some people I know with SEC bias, they might find that to be a little crazy because, hey, I mean, the SEC fans, they're used to having 2 teams a year being talked about in the playoff, right, Jay?
Yeah, for sure. BYU even mentioned in the playoff, obviously wouldn't have happened if this wasn't this crazy year with the pandemic. And obviously, well, their schedule would be a whole lot different too. And there's, probably pretty doubtful that they'd be undefeated at this point, seeing as how they had 5 Power 5 programs on the schedule that they would have already played. So, but it's fun to talk about. And like I said, it's everything's different this year. Nothing's as status quo. So that's probably why they're even in the conversation.
Right. And yeah, fitting to have a little bit of a crazy scenario for college football in a crazy year here. But the one thing that's really given BYU the platform to be on track for a playoff berth and potentially and to be in the conversation was the decision to leave the Mountain West for independence. And we're going back about a decade here. I guess I just want to set it up for people who didn't follow this decision closely here. Was the goal of was BYU's goal to position itself to join a Power 5 conference by going independent? And if so, were they preferring the Big 12 and Pac-12? I assume those are the better geographic fits.
Yeah, what happened was 2010, there was a big kind of realignment. The landscape was shifting greatly with the Big 12 and Texas threatening to go to the Pac-12, at the time, the Pac-10. Oklahoma thinking about joining them. And then at the time, so BYU was in the Mountain West along with TCU and Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And TCU went to the Big 12, as everyone knows. They first went to the Big East, and that didn't last very long, and then the Big 12. Then Utah got invited to the Pac-12 along with Colorado, and BYU was hurt. I mean, Utah and BYU have been rivals, same conference, everything, only 30 miles apart. And so that was a big blow to BYU. And the other thing BYU wasn't happy with was the Mountain West television deal, their television contract, where they had their own station and it wasn't distributed very well. It was called The Mountain. And so that was the impetus for BYU to go independent. But at the time they said, we're going to do this until we, with the idea of getting a invite from a Power 5 conference, they had their eyes mostly on the Big 12. BYU just isn't really a fit culturally for the Pac-12. BYU is a private school, very conservative. So there's just kind of a lot of reasons why the Pac-12 basically bypassed BYU and took Utah, although BYU had a bigger football stadium, a better football tradition. Utah had made it to the Sugar Bowl in '98. So that was kind of where they kind of rose a little bit. But so anyway, BYU wanted to be mostly aligned with the Big 12, which was schools that are more, on that kind of with the same social kind of agenda, or kind of a better fit for BYU. And then the Big 12, a few years later, kind of announced they weren't interested in expanding. And so that's kind of where BYU sits right now, is just basically kind of in a holding pattern. The reason they can stay independent is because they have a deal with ESPN, not only to televise 6 of their home games a year, but also ESPN gets them into a bowl game every year, because as you guys know, ESPN owns 13 or 14 bowls, something like that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how they've been able to do it. They're not Notre Dame. They don't have as good a deal like Notre Dame has with NBC. They don't have a scheduling agreement like Notre Dame has with the ACC, but they've kind of been able to make it work, just with those things that I just said.
Well, so I understand too, it hasn't always been the smoothest road in terms of scheduling. Like I see one of the criticisms I've heard with their schedule is you'll get those big games out of the front. Like last year we saw them play Tennessee. They beat Tennessee, they beat USC, and then they kind of fall off. They kind of fall off the map a little bit because they'll play some smaller teams as you go throughout the season. Have you heard any other types of criticism around independence? And where's most of the fan base stand on this? Are most of the fans into the idea of being an independent?
Yeah, I would say that it's probably 75-25 split. That's 75% or for. Obviously, if a Power 5 conference invited them, they would take it in a heartbeat. But there's always talk every year, why don't they just go back to the Mountain West? Why don't they, join maybe even the AAC, the American? But I think this year is a good example. If BYU was in a conference, was in the Mountain West, they wouldn't have been able to play until whatever they started, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And BYU's already got 7 games, and BYU plays Boise State this week. BYU's got 7 games under its belt, and Boise State has 2. So the only way BYU did that was because they were independent and could go out when their schedule just was obliterated by COVID. They were able to go out and get these games. So, but to answer your question, I would say the fan base is pretty happy with it. Obviously, the schedule is really front loaded. Even this year, they would have played Utah, Minnesota, Missouri, Arizona State, Stanford. We're on the schedule, and almost all those games at Stanford were in September or early October. So that's been the biggest criticism, is they play really, really good teams, and then they play some really, really bad teams, one FCS team a year, and then they've had to look toward the Sun Belt and the Conference USA to get games. And so there's just a big shift in their schedule about mid-October.
You sound like you're describing SEC non-conference football, though, Jay.
Yeah, although what they have, three of those, where BYU's had, 5 or 6 of those every year.
Right. So obviously Independence has benefited the program this year.
This year for sure. I mean, they're getting exposure.
Right.
Zach Wilson, quarterback, is getting a little bit of Heisman talk. He's probably 5 or 6 on the list. I'm not saying he's up there with Trevor Lawrence and Mac Jones and Kyle Trask, but he's up there. He's at least in the conversation. So I don't think any of that would have been happening. Well, I know none of that would have been happening if they were in a conference. So it's actually benefited them this year.
Right. All right, Rob, you want to jump in on the Kalani Sitake era?
Yeah. How's it going, Jay? Robert here. Thanks for joining us again. Glad to have you on. So I would just like to switch gears a little bit and talk about the Kalani Sitake era. So I read a couple pieces about Sitake and, head coach Cal Whittingham being good friends. Can you walk us through their coaching connection and their friendship on the field and off the field?
Yeah, sure. So Kyle Whittingham has actually played football at BYU. He's a BYU former player, and so is Kalani Sitake. And then when Kyle got the head job at Utah, he actually replaced Urban Meyer. Obviously was at Florida. Actually, Urban Meyer went from Utah to Florida.
Yeah.
Kyle Whittingham was his top assistant. He got the job. A year or two later, Kyle hired Kalani Sitake. So Kalani was the defensive coordinator at Utah under Kyle Whittingham for 4 or 5 years. He was also a linebackers coach, defensive line coach. So, and then when Gary Anderson went from Wisconsin to Oregon State, Gary Anderson hired Kalani to go up there, and Kalani was up there 1 year at Oregon State. And then when the BYU job opened, Bronco Mendenhall went from BYU to Virginia. Then Kalani, former player, obviously got the BYU job, and he's been there. This is his 5th year. So, yeah, those two are very close. It's an interesting week when the BYU Utah week is always interesting around here because of proximity and other reasons. And it made it even spicier now that you got the two really, really good friends going head to head. So it's made for a real interesting
Is that a
game.
nasty rivalry? BYU and Utah, is that a nasty rivalry?
There has been some nastiness to it. It's a really weird rivalry because you literally have family members going to both schools, husband and wife. They're just so intertwined. Several of BYU's or coaches coached at Utah or played at Utah and vice versa. So you just get a lot of there's so much interplay between them. Ironically, Urban Meyer kind of came along, and it was a pretty congenial rivalry until the early 2000s. Urban Meyer came along, and he kind of put in a few of the things he's been known to do, like when he was at Ohio State. And I don't know if he did it at Florida,
he did.
He would only refer to Ohio State as Ohio, or the school up north, I think is what he called them or something. And he brought some of that to Utah. And I think that's kind of the turning point where the rivalry got a little ugly. And then when the tide turned and Utah started winning more, BYU dominated for years and years, and then under Lavelle Edwards. And then when the tide turned and Utah started dominating, it got a little uglier. And then I think it's kind of softened a little bit these last few years when they're not in the same league anymore. The game is usually played at the first of the season instead of the final game of the season. So for factors like that, so there's not a lot of run up to it as usual. So I think it's actually not as nasty as it was, but there was a few years there where it got pretty heated.
Yeah, that's good stuff right there, Jay. And I just would like to stay, talking about Kalani Sitake. You talked about the BYU's non-conference schedule and, all the tough teams that they play. And one thing that Sataki kind of harped on was bringing depth to that BYU program. This team so far looks super athletic, and it seems like it has a lot of depth. Could you talk about Kalani Sataki on the recruiting trail and him bringing depth to this BYU program?
Yeah, so Kalani is the first Polynesian, or the first Tongan head coach of Tongan descent in college football. He's, I think, second or third of Polynesian descent behind the Navy coach, Ken Namatalolo. And so Kalani came in and he really hits what they call the Polynesian pipeline really hard, has brought in a lot of those really strong, tough, hard-nosed football players, and he's built a lot of depth. And that's something that BYU's always struggled with. They've generally been okay. They're first mainline guys, first stringers, but a guy goes down and they have a couple injuries and they just seem to fade away with each season. And this year you've seen they've literally suffered 5 season-ending injuries, and you wouldn't know it just because of the depth that he's brought in there. He's started a pretty good walk-on program. As you guys know, schools only get 85 scholarships, but 4 or 5 of the guys that are really contributing this year are walk-ons, and that's with Kalani basically saying, hey, if you'll walk on here, you'll get a fair shot at playing, and he's delivered on that promise. So those are kind of the factors where he's done a really good job of building the depth.
That's awesome. Could you also go into, the recruiting struggles that BYU might have? Would you categorize BYU as a Notre Dame, a Stanford, Vanderbilt, who has some limitations when it comes to recruiting players, whether, because of the religious affiliations or academic school? So do you group BYU in those categories with those teams when it comes to recruiting?
Yeah, for sure. It's a very difficult academic school. It's obviously, as you guys probably know, it's owned by the Mormon Church, or official name is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But and so they have what's called an honor code, and it's really strict. It bans a lot of not only drugs, alcohol, but premarital sex. So they find it very difficult to convince some players, especially players that aren't Mormon, to attend school there. It is open to all religions or non-religions. It's just, but they just have to sign that honor code. So that cuts their recruiting pool down pretty significantly. And then BYU's, it's basically kind of like Mecca for Mormons throughout the world. So it's very, very difficult to get into, as far as you have to have an ACT or an SAT score that's just crazy hard. Because the demand to go there is so high. And then that just trickles down to where it's hard to get athletes in. They do get some in on these, they're like special permit or whatever. But it's hard. And then it's hard for anyone really to succeed when they're competing against these really, really smart people that are in their classes with them. So yeah, it's a kind of a shallow recruiting pool of people that, athletes that will accept all those terms. And so they literally do battle that every year. It's Bronco Mendenhall, the old coach, used to say there were literally 50 players each year across the country that had Division I talent, Division I ability, and would sign up for all that other stuff that I just mentioned. So yeah, it is difficult to recruit there.
Wow, that's some great insight right there, Jay. I would just like to change gears a little bit. And we know Kalani Sataki was, granted the contract extension. However, leading to this season, how did the fan base feel about the direction of the program under Sataki? And from the outside, it seems like he had some highs so far, going back to last year, beating USC, Tennessee, and Boise State, but also some of those lows losing to USF. So could you explain the ups and downs of this program under the Sataki era, and how he has it rolling this year in a pandemic year? Yeah,
for sure. So he started out 9-4 his first year. the 4 losses were by a combined 8 points. So they were in every single game. And then the following year, they went 4-9. The bottom just fell out. They didn't have a quarterback. They had some injuries. He had hired Ty Detmer, the former Heisman Trophy winner, as offensive coordinator with no experience aside from being a high school coach. And so that just experiment failed in that second year. So then he changed his whole offensive staff in year 3, and so those guys have done a really good job. They found Zach Wilson, the quarterback they have now. He's been a phenomenal find, and they've turned it around. The problem last year was, like you just mentioned, the inconsistency. They beat Tennessee in overtime. They beat USC, and then they just turned around. They lost to Toledo, and then at the end of the season, they stumbled a little bit. They lost to San Diego State and to Hawaii in a bowl game on Christmas Eve in Hawaii. And so coming into this year, there was just that little trepidation. Maybe did they give him the extension too soon? They gave him the extension after they beat Boise State and got bowl eligible last year. And so some fans were a little worried, but so this year he's obviously 7-0, ranked number 9 in the country. And it looks like he's got his guys in there. The other thing you need to mention when you talk about BYU is this concept of Mormon missions, where BYU players, most of them, 75% of them, after they graduate from high school, they go on 2-year church missions. Mm-hmm. And so generally they're a little older, more mature, but the downside is they haven't played in 2 years. They're not out there, throwing footballs and kicking footballs while they're on their proselyting missions. So that he's had to juggle that, and he's finally got kind of his guys, so to speak, his recruits, or most of them are, back from their missions and into the program. And so I think generally most people are pretty happy with what he's done now in year 5.
I want to go back. You mentioned an interesting phrase with the Polynesian pipeline. Is that area of the world, is that just a place where the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has a good connection? Because I feel like BYU has done a good job recruiting from that part of the world in general.
Yeah, for sure. So Samoa, Tonga, and especially Hawaii are really fertile recruiting grounds for BYU. Of course, a lot of the Polynesians have immigrated to the United States. Mm-hmm. So the population of Utah is about 60% Mormon, and also the population of Utah is like 12% Polynesian. And so you do absolutely, there is a big connection there. And BYU was kind of one of the first schools, even back in the Bell Edwards era, to discover kind of the Polynesian player, as a lot of them play rugby or grew up playing rugby, but they're just sturdy, stout, athletic people. I don't want to stereotype or anything, but they're gifted. Football is almost like a sport made for that ethnicity in a way. And so BYU has done a really good job of getting its fair share of those types of players into Provo.
Yeah, nobody else is recruiting a part of the world. Why not be one of the first ones in there? And I know Utah does a good job too. It seems like Utah always has a good representation from that part of the world as well. But let's dive into the 2020 season here. BYU were 7-0, sitting there at 7-0. Big win over Navy to kick off the season. Troy dominant. Really, they've been dominant in almost every single game except UTSA seemed to be a little bit of a hiccup. And then the Houston game, that's a tough road game though. Other than that, BYU, how do you feel about this team this year? They don't seem to have been really truly challenged outside of that Houston game.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think when they beat Navy, kind of the narrative was that Navy really didn't practice a lot because of COVID, didn't do a lot of hitting, and so people, maybe some wrote that off as Navy just wasn't ready. But But the fact is, if you look at these games, BYU is dominating them to the so much that literally Zach Wilson and most of the starters haven't played starting midway through the third quarter. They've been so far ahead. For instance, the other night they were ahead 35-3 in the first half on Western Kentucky. So they just kind of coasted in the second half. Against Houston, they fell behind. I think they were behind by double digits. I can't exactly remember. Maybe it was 12 points, and they came roaring back and won by 17. So that was the big test up until coming this week. Obviously, Boise State is a very good program and should provide BYU's biggest test. And the interesting thing about this game is it was off the schedule when the Mountain West had determined they weren't going to play, and then the Mountain West was telling its members that they could only play conference games. And somehow Air Force was able to convince them to let them play Navy and Army. And so then Boise State went and said, hey, if Air Force is going to do it, can we play BYU? So that's how this game was added kind of late. Wasn't added until October 1st. But now it's really, really going to be vital for BYU's resume. If you want to talk New Year's Six or anything, that because BYU's strength of schedule is I think it's in the 90s right now. So this is really, really needed resume builder for BYU. Just getting Boise State on the schedule was a pretty big coup this year.
Well, let's talk about that Boise State game. The Cougars are 3-7 all time against Boise State. It's a fairly recent rivalry too. My understanding, they started playing 2003, I believe. The Cougars did win last year in Provo, but they've never won up on that blue turf. Not a lot of people do well on that blue turf, but how do they usually play when they're in Boise? Are the games at least relatively competitive? Are they at least, or do they go up there and kind of how every team's got that one destination where you just dread going to as a fan base? How does Boise do with BYU? How those two mix?
Yeah, ironically, the games have been really, really close. In fact, 3 of the games have been decided by a single point up in Boise. And then 2 years ago, the Boise State won 21-16, but BYU was on the 5-yard line. Zach Wilson was a freshman then. They were on the 5-yard line with under a minute to go and couldn't punch it in, couldn't score. So 4 of those 5 games in Boise have been just right down to the wire, just nail biters. There was one year when I think Boise won 55-30. I can't remember the quarterback. It might have been Rippon, but Boise had just a phenomenal quarterback and just kind of chewed them up. But other than that, the games have been just razor close. Down here in Provo, I think BYU has won 2 or 3 of the 5. And those games haven't been as close, except last year it was close. BYU, I think, won 28-25, was a really close game. So these are just 2 really evenly matched teams. They recruit a lot of the kind of same kids. They're located about 300 miles apart is all. And so they get a lot of kids from the Intermountain West and they're just, and obviously Boise State has a great tradition with Chris Peterson and even before that, Dirk Cutter. Mm-hmm. And they've just got it going up there in Boise on that blue turf. They're a legitimate, probably the best group of 5 school out there year in and year out. I know Central Florida has kind of maybe overtaken them a little bit in the last couple of years, but Boise for 20-25 years has been really, really good.
Yeah, and nationally too, well-known brand. Not that BYU's plenty well-known, but well-respected brand where you go up there, you get a win on that blue turf on Friday night. You talk about great resume builder for the Cougars, potentially, if you're going to talk about a playoff spot down the road. One of the unique challenges they're facing this week in Provo is, of course, tomorrow is the election. Election Tuesday, the NCAA mandated no practice. I actually saw this on your article feed, Jay. That's why I wanted to bring this up. But I know football coaches are going to downplay things. We're just going to have to deal with it, was the quote in your article there coming out of BYU. But they were denied BYU. They take Sundays off due to that's affiliated with the Mormon Church. They take Sundays off at BYU, so they're also required to take Tuesday off this week. So you're losing 2 days of practice leading up to an already shortened week with Boise State. What's the overall feeling around the program about that? That doesn't seem too fair.
Yeah, they were not happy with it. They appealed or applied for a waiver to the NCAA based on those two things, the short week and the no Sunday play. Boise State, which doesn't have the no Sunday play restriction, also applied. But both schools were told no. And it's just kind of tough. BYU just basically said, yeah, we'll deal with it. Maybe it'll be a blessing in disguise. Maybe, we've played 7 games. Maybe a good rest up day will be good, healing day. I think the irony is in the state of Utah, at least 99% of the voting is done by mail-in ballot. So all the voting is already done. In fact, Kalani Sitake said the other night, all our guys have already voted. We made sure we sat down with them, had them with their ballots. And so, basically Tuesday will come and, it's not like the old days where we used to drive down to the local elementary school and vote or whatever.
Right.
All that's been done, but I do think it does send a good message from the NCAA that how important this day is, and how important it is for these student athletes to become more civically involved and to vote. So I'm really for that message. I just think that maybe they could have given a little bit of leeway to some of these schools that are playing on Thursday or Friday this week.
And I totally agree with that. I think the attention by the NCAA is good, particularly in this year. We've had a lot of social unrest and everything. I think it's a very good message for the NCAA in general, but it's kind of, do you feel like it lacks a little bit of common sense and almost falls under grandstanding if you don't create an exception for something where, especially when they're saying our guys have voted already?
Yeah, I do, but it's just, BYU, if you look at the history, this whole no Sunday play is, the NCAA has accommodated them a lot for this, especially when it comes to the NCAA basketball tournament. And so I think there might be a feeling out there that there might be a little bit of fatigue of, BYU fatigue with this issue that keeps coming up. And so I can kind of see their point of view on it when it comes to BYU. But yeah, I don't know. I just think to take a hard line on it, not to be very kind of, lax on it, especially this year where teams haven't been able to control their schedules as much as possible. And I almost guarantee you they wouldn't have put this game up on a Friday night if they knew they couldn't practice on Tuesday. They probably would have kept it at the original time, which would have been Saturday.
Good point.
Yeah, great point, Jay. I definitely agree with you in regards to the NCAA, kind of, showing their appreciation for the election and the importance of everything surrounding it. But to have you on, I would definitely be remiss to not talk about, one of the hottest quarterbacks in the nation right now, and Zach Wilson. So I know it's a couple, nicknames out there. One that jumped out to me was the Mormon Manziel. Do you think, stylistically that, Zach Wilson plays like Johnny Manziel, a former Heisman Trophy winner?
Yeah, a little bit. I think Zach's got a much stronger arm. He might not be quite as mobile as Johnny Manziel was. I think the thing that really sets Zach Wilson apart is he's such a student of the game. He rarely makes a bad decision. I think he threw the pick the other night. That was only his second pick. I think his TD pass to pick ratio is something like 16-2 or something. But Zach is a real cerebral guy. I'm not saying that Johnny Manziel wasn't, but he was more of a freewheeler, I think, a risk taker. Where this Zach Wilson, I've never been around an athlete. I've been doing this almost 30 years. who works on his film study as much as Zach Wilson does. He was on the Jim Rome show the other night, and Jim Rome asked him some question about a throw he made, and Zach went into this 10-minute discussion about how he saw this on film and how he was just waiting for the right opportunity to make that pass. But he's just legendary around Provo for just his film study. And then I don't know if you guys have watched any of the broadcasts on ESPN, but they always mention how in the summer and spring he drove like 10 miles or 10 hours to California to go to a quarterback camp that John Beck and other former professional quarterbacks run there in Southern California. So this is just, he's just a gym rat, totally dedicated to his craft, like no college athlete that I've ever covered. He's just like his roommates and teammates sometimes complain because they're like, that's all Zach will talk about is football, 24/7, nonstop football. So that's just, he's just, this is a kid that was just born to basically play quarterback. And he takes that really, really seriously.
That's amazing right there. So I would just like to piggyback on your last statement about, being a kid that's, groomed to grow to play the quarterback position. So when we talk about the quarterback position, we always, you hear the term arm talent. So that seems to be the 1A, 1B measurement of a quarterback. Do you think the play of Zach Wilson can kind of propel him into a Jordan Love situation that we saw in this previous year draft, where a team moving up to come grab him early in the draft?
Yeah, I don't know. First of all, he's a junior and he hasn't for sure said he's coming out. I think if he's going to be a top, if he's going to be one of the top 5 QBs taken, he'd be nuts to not come out. But so yeah, I think he is coming out. But I don't know. I've just been reading a few draft boards and it seems like there's not as much out there yet on that. But I can see him taking that Jordan Love route. I think it would be beneficial for Zach to get in that same kind of situation where Jordan Love is behind Aaron Rodgers and Zach wouldn't be thrown right into the fire as a starter like you see, Joe Burrow and some of these other guys who are, I guess Tua Tagovailoa is just getting his first start now. But I think Zach could literally benefit from, from playing kind of the backup role for a year or two, learn from a master like Aaron Rodgers or someone else, and then see what he can do.
That's yeah. So another thing, Jay, I know we talked about we're talking about Zach Wilson. He's pretty much garners all the national attention. Of course, playing the quarterback position, you kind of will be. But I would like to kind of talk about some other players. One of the main guys that I like actually, on the next level is the tight end Isaac Rex. Could you talk about his maturation with Matt Bushman going down, being lost for the season? So could you talk about Isaac Rex a little bit more in that offense and being one of those freaky athletes that we've seen in the program, along with Taysom Hill and Ziggy Ansah?
Yeah, so Isaac was a highly recruited guy out of Southern California. His dad's a former Cougar, played for BYU, a guy named Byron Rex. So Isaac came in with a lot of fanfare, and then he went on one of the 2-year church missions that I mentioned before. So we all kind of forgot about him a little bit, and then he shows up this year, and he redshirted last year, so he was in the program last year, but he took advantage of that deal where you could play 4 games and still redshirt. And so he's a 22-year-old freshman. So he's right at the prime, and he's actually just he's lived up to the hype. He's got 4 TD catches. He's not as good as Matt Bushman yet. Matt Bushman's going to be probably a NFL draft pick here this next April, but he's been he's lived up to everything that people said he was coming out of high school. It just took a couple of years to kind of see that come to fruition. But yeah, just he's got the whole package that you want in a tight end, big and powerful and strong, yet fast and really soft hands. So he's already made a couple of just outstanding catches this year.
Yeah, he has. Big, strong guy, definitely athletic for his size. Another guy that I actually has my eye on is the receiver Dax Mills. So we kind of see that quick, shifty route runners are making their names in the NFL. You see the Cole Beasleys, you see the Scotty Millers emerging down there in Tampa with Tom Brady. So could you give us a scouting evaluation of Dax Mill, a pro comp comparison on the next level?
Yeah, those are guys you mentioned are good. The kid out of Clemson who I think he's with the Raiders now, Renfro. Yeah, kind of like that. Zach is a little taller. I mean, not Zach. Dax Milne. So Dax Milne and Zach Wilson are been friends. They're like best friends since they were like 12 years old. So I get them mixed up sometimes. But yeah, so Dax is he was actually a walk-on. He had a couple other offers out of high school, and his best friend Zach Wilson literally talked him into going to BYU and walking on. And he's been just a phenomenal surprise for everybody in the program. He's just a relentless worker with great hands. He kind of had his coming out party last year against USC, where he caught the kind of the game-winning touchdown or the go-ahead touchdown in the fourth quarter. And so he's just been a real pleasant surprise for the program because he's a walk-on and all that. But he and Zach have a great chemistry. Zach's found him a lot. They've got another receiver named Gunnar Romney, who's been a little bit banged up the last couple of games, who also gives them that really good 1-2 punch between Romney and Milne. Gunnar Romney's the nephew of the former presidential candidate Mitt Romney. So that's a little bit of a kind of a national. You could drop that knowledge if you were ever calling a BYU game.
That's, I think that's a small pool to recruit from. Nephews of former presidential candidates. That's a small pool as well.
Sure.
Well, hey, I mean, we could sit here and talk about this offense. And Romney, by the way, he's made a couple big plays throughout the season, but this offense is absolutely loaded. We could probably talk about it on and on, but we'll give you a break there, Jay. We'll move on to BYU's path to the playoff. Let's just go. I want to break it down because I think, again, when you say it, it sounds like, well, what about this team? What about that team? But if you break it down, in the SEC, you really got Alabama and off, maybe on the off chance that Texas A&M could be a wild card on that. But I'm not going to go conference by conference. I'll give you the exact prescription that I see for BYU to get in the playoff. You got to beat Boise State and run the table. Finish your season here. You got to avoid a Pac-12 champ going unbeaten. But really, are you nervous about any team outside of Oregon going undefeated in the Pac-12 this year, Jay?
I can see locally, obviously I live here right in the shadows of the University of Utah.
Yeah.
They're rebuilding. They've got, especially on defense, they had something like 9 players drafted, but Utah could, if they got a quarterback transfer from South Carolina, who his name escapes me right now.
Jake Bentley.
Yeah, Jake Bentley, who's
which is why I did not include Utah in that unbeaten chance.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I've watched a lot of Jake Bentley.
But yeah, I think Oregon is supposed to be good. USC, you just never know with them. They just got so much talent that when they put it together, you never know what could happen.
Mm-hmm.
Utah does have a really favorable schedule with their tougher games at home, their easier Pac-12 games on the road. So that's why I kind of threw them in there as maybe potentially going undefeated. Obviously, this Boise State BYU loser will be automatically knocked out of it. Right. And then Cincinnati is another team that's kind of out there. And if you compare their schedule with BYU's, I think you got to hand it to Cincinnati. So that would be another maybe competitor for that spot.
I agree with you in terms of strength of schedule with Cincinnati. Cincinnati would absolutely get the edge. That American Athletic Conference schedule would bring them a bunch of wins. I know they got UCF coming up. They certainly have had 2 nice wins the last couple of weeks against SMU and Memphis this past Saturday. But I've watched Cincinnati play a little bit, and do you think the committee with weird football season? I think a lot of it's going to be old school BCS style points / the eye test. Have you watched Cincinnati play much this year? If so, do you think that BYU would get the edge on that eye test over them? Because I do.
Yeah, I've only watched one Cincinnati game, and that was Army, I think, in week 2 or week 3. If only because BYU was supposed to play Army the following week, and then it got canceled by COVID. Yeah, I think you probably have a point there. I think BYU has a little bit better, maybe not real much, but of a national brand, a national following. And I think it was going to help BYU that they got a Heisman Trophy candidate in Wilson too, that might bring them a little bit more extra attention. And then BYU's exposure as far as being on ESPN every week or an ESPN platform has been really, really good for them. In a lot of these games, they've been kind of the only game on at that particular time.
Right.
And so their exposure has been really good as well. So I think those are some factors that play into maybe if it came down to those two schools that might weigh in BYU's favor.
I think Wilson and that offense are the difference, because Desmond Ridder, I think he's a solid quarterback for college football, and he's obviously doing a great job with Cincinnati, but watch him try to throw the ball down the field and then watch Zach Wilson do it. Which one of those two is going to put up a better fight against, let's say, Clemson?
Yeah, I think you'd have to go Wilson too. And I tell people all the time, in college football, the quarterback is so important. It's huge, that position. When you've got one of the best ones in the country, you're ahead of the curve, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah. Talk about that quarterback position. We're some Gators fans, so we know about that, Jay.
Yeah, you've had Tebow and some good ones over the years, that's for sure.
Not until recently. We've had about a decade off of the quarterback position, though, so it's nice to have one back again. We certainly appreciate it now. But the only wild card team I'll throw in there, and I said this earlier, Jay, but Texas A&M, if they can run the table, they had that nice win over Florida. If they can run the table, go 9-1, and finish second in the West behind Alabama, that could be some trouble for BYU. But really, we're 3 steps away. Obviously, you got to take care of business if you're BYU. Avoid an unbeaten Pac-12 champ. I still think the Cougars would get the nod over Cincinnati just by the eye test, and avoid a wild card at Texas A&M. We're getting closer and closer to that spot. Now I have to ask you this. Do you believe that it can happen this year? Like, what are your odds? I know it's still a little bit of a long shot, but it's November. We're talking about BYU in the playoffs, so that's got to be pretty cool. Are you starting to come around on the idea? Do you believe it's a decent shot?
I'm still fairly skeptical, if only because I've watched, what's happened to Central Florida in those years where they went undefeated and against a better schedule. So I'm slowly kind of considering it, I guess, or letting it play in my mind, but it just seems really, really out there. After this Boise State game, BYU's only got 2 games left on their schedule. They got North Alabama, an FCS team, and then they got San Diego State, who started 2-0. But I don't know if BYU's just going to have the data points there, especially when they go, a couple weeks in a row without playing, and when they play an FCS opponent. So I don't know. It seems like a big leap to me to think that they could be in there. And then I wouldn't be surprised if a Pac-12 team runs the table. I just think the Pac-12 is so hungry to get a team in that college football playoff that's a contender that I just think a team's going to rise up and run the table in the Pac-12. But I will allow that, like you said, that the door is creeping open for BYU just a little bit.
There's some belief. I hear it. I hear the belief right there. Is there any talk about making up that Army game? Because that could definitely help bolster the strength of schedule.
Yeah, there is. There's been a lot of talk. From my end, and of course, most of my sources are at BYU, is that Army is dragging its feet. BYU wants that game to be played on November 28th. Of course, that gives Army 2 weeks before their Navy game, which is obviously really, really big on their schedule.
Right.
But I guess my question is, if both teams wanted to play it, why isn't it already on the schedule? And because Army has that weekend off, BYU has it off, so there must be some reason why they haven't already announced it. And from what I've heard, it's that Army isn't sure it wants to go ahead and to throw that up there. But I know and they're having a good season at Army, and so it would be a good test for BYU, especially travel across the country and play that game in New York, right. And would put them kind of back in the national consciousness after going, what would it be, 3 weeks from playing Boise without an FCS opponent,
right.
FBS opponent.
Right, yeah, because they're gonna I think that might actually hurt them a little bit. They'll kind of disappear off the scene a little bit. They'll have those multiple bye weeks leading into San Diego State on December 12th. Boy, it'd be great if they could play that Army game. Maybe Army's trying to protect that Navy game, because I know that I believe it already got moved to West Point this year. So maybe they're just trying to do everything they can to protect that game, not endanger it. But oh man, let's hope that game gets added, because if BYU can add an Army win to the schedule, that definitely bolsters the playoff resume, doesn't it?
Yeah, you would think. I think Army's shown, and they're ranked. Their only loss was to Cincinnati by a touchdown, and Cincinnati's in the top 10 now. So yeah, for sure. I think that's why BYU is working so hard to get that game, and I know BYU is working hard for other games as well, to add if anything pops up. They've literally told schools, hey, if you get a game canceled by COVID, think of us. We're here. They've got those basically 3 open dates after the Boise State game that they could, and BYU is willing to travel. It's a pretty well-funded program that money is not going to be a stumbling block for them as far as chartering a flight and transporting 100 players and staff members out somewhere for a game.
Well, Jay, just keep rooting for chalk in the college football season. Alabama, you want to see Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State. And then after that, I mean, the Big 12's out of it after Oklahoma State went down this week. And then out of that, BYU fans, root for Oregon, Washington, USC, Utah, root for them all to go down. And you might have that shot. Texas A&M, I have a feeling they'll stumble along the way somewhere. So, well, I think this is turning out to be a fascinating story out of Provo this year. Jay, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast on American Football Stories with us and sharing your knowledge around the program. And is there anything you'd like to plug?
Oh, not really. You can follow me on Twitter. As you guys say, I make it confusing. My name is Jay Drew, but on Twitter, I'm at Drew J. 2 first names, basically.
I like that.
So, yeah, just follow me on Twitter and, go to Deseret.com if you want to learn more about the BYU Cougars, the BYU football program, and look up my stories and follow this team and this quarterback, Zach Wilson, and see how it goes.
Well, we'll be following.
Thank you, Jay.
Closely.
We will definitely be following.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jay.
Okay, thanks for having me on, guys.
All right. Take care, Jay.
You play to win the game. Hello? You play to win the game. You don't play to just play it. That's the great thing about sports. You play to win. And I don't care if you don't have any wins. You go play to win. When you start telling me it doesn't matter, then retire. Get out. Because it matters.
I hope there's Bigfoot. I don't think there is. The reason I don't think there is because we found bones of dinosaurs and everything else, but we haven't found bones that I've heard of Bigfoot.
I'm very upset. We shouldn't have been in the ball game with fast field goal. The coach had sent him in. We shouldn't have sent him in. That's a dang coaching mistake. The kids are playing their tail off, and the coaches are screwing it up.
We just got to stop that little inside trap. You know, the option didn't hurt us much. We played pretty hard. We just got to stop that inside thing. Offensively, we kind of sputtered around, got the ball in the end zone. You know, defensively, we got to get out off the field on that 2-minute drive.
Injuries to your offensive line. What do you do in the second half?
Oh, we're just go play. We just got to keep playing.
Thank you, Coach.
He has a magnificent personality, I'll tell you.
We receive a lot of mail during the course of the season, and a lot of it's good mail, a lot of it's bad. And one of the
I would say that most of it is good, though, isn't it, Bill?
Yeah, I think so.
I'd say 95 to 98% of the mail we get is always good.
But the one question that keeps coming up where Woody Hayes' name is involved, they say you're a man of no mercy. And yet,
you know, frankly, I don't care much what they think.